Greetings and welcome to another impressions video here at Words About Games, and today we're going to be looking at Devotion. Devotion is a first-person psychological horror game set in an apartment complex in Taipei during the 1980s. You play as troubled screenwriter Du Fengyu, whose career has stagnated, which puts a strain on both his finances and his relationship with his wife. He's also struggling as his daughter, Mei Xin, begins suffering from some sort of mysterious illness. Devotion is from Red Candle Games, creators of 2017's excellent horror adventure game Detention. As with their previous work, Devotion is steeped in Taiwanese lore, history, and tradition, which is used to excellent effect to create a really tense, very different kind of horror experience than the kind we usually see in Western gaming. As someone who is wholly unfamiliar with Taiwanese culture and history, Devotion provides an insight that is both fascinating and disturbing in equal measure. Sure, there are elements of Devotion that are fairly universal to the quintessential horror experience. Dark hallways, creepy sounds, horrifying visuals. After all, some fears are quite basic. But Devotion marries these horror tropes with elements of Taiwanese folklore to create something unfamiliar and downright unsettling. The fear of the unknown is incredibly powerful, and thanks to how different Devotion is in its world and presentation, as someone who doesn't know a whole lot about the world it comes from, it creates a horror experience I was never able to get comfortable with. From start to finish, I was unsettled, which meant I was a prime candidate for its scares. And wow, this game really does bring the scares. From startling surprises to incredibly creepy imagery and some truly excellent sound design, Devotion is a really well crafted horror experience. From the outset, the game really nails a creepy and foreboding atmosphere, which it uses to ensure you're always uneasy and constantly nervous about what could potentially be around the next corner or behind the next door. It helps that the payoffs are generally excellent. Devotion favours a slow burn to its scariest moments, building towards them slowly and relying on the horror of the imagery itself to truly terrify. An incredibly effective scene involving mannequins comes to mind. When you first come across them, you know they're going to do something. The game also knows that you know this, so instead of jump scaring you almost immediately, as many other horror games would do, the horror creeps up. It's subtle at first, making you question whether you're imagining things, then slowly builds and builds until you reach a point where, well, that would be telling, wouldn't it? The pacing is both deliberate and wonderful throughout, aside from one chase sequence towards the end. It's quite scary at first, but quickly becomes tedious as you sprint through a maze looking for the correct sequence of doors to progress to the next area. The game does also lose some of its horror towards the climax, as it begins to peel away the layers of its story, trading in the supernatural horror for the reality of your situation. Ironic given the extended hallucination you experience during the final section of the game. Devotion manages to make you empathise with its characters in a very short amount of time. It's a story told mostly through metaphor, imagery, and notes found scattered through the apartment complex you explore, but it's enough to clue you into who the characters are and what their struggle is. It keeps you guessing until its heartbreaking final moments. The way it delivers its exposition and backstory is a big part of its effectiveness. While it's scaring the bejesus out of you, you'll be exploring the same apartment through different periods of time, dropping in on its inhabitants across the span of almost a decade. It's quite a neat mechanic, and between the changes that time has wrought and the surreal otherworldly goings-on, you'll quickly forget that you're more or less exploring the same few rooms for most of the game's runtime. And that's how you'll interact with Devotion for the majority of your time with it, exploring, piecing together what's going on from both explicit and environmental storytelling. There are a few puzzles to solve here and there, but nothing too taxing, mostly involving finding an item and taking it to the place you can use it. It's nothing you'll get stuck on for more than a few moments. Anything more involved could potentially derail the near-perfect pacing. Devotion is a fantastically crafted horror experience with a compelling story populated by deep characters. It's a game that uses unsettling imagery to make you constantly feel like nothing is ever quite right, with expertly paced scares and puzzles that will keep you in a constant state of unease. And when the scares do come, they're incredibly effective thanks to their timing and nature. Even when more traditional horror scares dry up towards their climax, they're replaced by the horror of the situation you're in, which might actually be worse. If you're a fan of horror games at all, Devotion is a game you definitely won't want to miss out on. Thank you very much for watching this video, guys. If you've enjoyed it, please keep it here at Words About Games. We've got tons of content, including our weekly podcast, more impressions videos, patch notes, and our weekly indie game of the week. We also stream over on Twitch at twitch.tv/wordsaboutgames every Monday, Thursday, and Saturday. And most importantly, have a great day.